Greetings, church, and welcome. My name is Tom Simmons, and I serve as lay leader at Glendale Heights United Methodist Church here in Durham, North Carolina. On behalf of my wife, Janae, and myself, I welcome you to this presentation of Stations of the Cross. I would like to give you a little history and explain what you are about to see. The Stations of the Cross was originally set up by Pastor Stacy Lundy to be a fully immersive and interactive experience detailing the last hours or the passion of Jesus Christ. In a typical setting, you would enter our fellowship hall, go through each station, and participate in different activities to give you a more in-depth experience. This year has been anything but typical. We have been forced to become more creative in our presentation. We encourage you to watch this with your families and participate along with the activities that are shown. We hope that you will find this to be a spiritually enriching experience.
Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, "Pray that you won't give in to temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. He said, "Father, if it's your will, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. Luke 22:39 through 44. Think about Jesus praying with such intensity and anguish that his sweat was like drops of blood. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I turn Jesus over to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, he was looking for an opportunity to turn him in. Matthew 26:14 through 16. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, should we fight with our swords?" One of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Jesus responded, "Stop! No more of this." He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a thief? Day after day I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time, when darkness rules." Luke 22:47 through 53. The coins in the bag represent the 30 pieces of silver that Judas received for betraying Jesus. Consider the weight of the coins and the terrible price of Judas's betrayal as you count the coins. At daybreak, the chief priests with the elders, legal experts, and the whole Sanhedrin formed a plan. They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "That's what you say." The chief priests were accusing him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Aren't you going to answer? What about all these accusations?" But Jesus gave no more answers, so that Pilate marveled. During the festival, Pilate released one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. A man named Barabbas was locked up with the rebels who had committed murder during an uprising. The crowd pushed forward and asked Pilate to release someone, as he regularly did. Pilate answered them, "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" He knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of jealousy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas to them instead. Pilate replied, "Then what do you want me to do with the one you call King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Why? What wrong has he done?" They shouted even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd, so he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed him over to be crucified. Mark 15, 1-15. We are all responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. Every one of us, because every one of us has sinned. You have called for his crucifixion with your actions. Every time you have said a hurtful word against a person who was made in God's image. Every time you have not loved your neighbor as yourself by pretending to not see the beggar on the side of the road. Every time you have not cared for the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant, as God commanded. Every time you have put someone or something above God. Every time you have chosen hatred over forgiveness. Every time you have lied. Every time you have refused to love your enemies. Every time you have judged another person. Every time you have put your trust in money, you have condemned Jesus to death with your actions. You have said it with your lives. Now at home, say it with your voice.
Crucify him.
Like the crowd did, shout.
Crucify him.
Yes, out loud.
Crucify him.
It's easy to cry out with a crowd. It's easy to sin with a crowd. It's harder when we have to hear our own voice and hear our own sin rather than hiding it with the sins of others. Then Pilate had Jesus taken and whipped. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and dressed him in a purple robe. Over and over they went up to him and said, "Greetings, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. John 19, 1-3. Crucifixion began with flogging the back of the victim with a short whip composed of braided leather strands tied to sharp pieces of bone and metal. Usually the punishment was 39 lashes. Its intent was to weaken the subject to a state just short of death. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrews is called Golgotha. John 19:16 through 17. The cross that Jesus had to carry probably weighed about 100 pounds. He would have had to support it on his back that was raw from the flogging.
As they were going out, they found Simon, a man from Cyrene. They forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Matthew 27, verse 32. Has there ever been a Simon in your life? Someone who pulled through for you when you were in dire need and help was nowhere to be found? Thank God for that person. Here is your chance to be a Simon to someone else. Take time to pray for a stranger in need. Be it the overworked single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Be it the laid-off worker who cannot pay their rent due to a closure of business. Pray for the hospital staff who are caring for victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe a prayer request that you have today so that someone may be a Simon of Cyrene for you as well. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The notice of the formal charge against him was written, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 outlaws with him, one on his right and one on his left. People walking by insulted him, shaking their heads and saying, "Ha! So you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, were you? Save yourself and come down from that cross." In the same way, the chief priests were making fun of him amongst themselves, together with the legal experts. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross. Then we'll see and believe. Even those who had been crucified with Jesus insulted him. Mark 15, verses 25 through 32. The Romans perfected the art of execution by crucifixion. It was carried out to inflict a maximum amount of pain before death, as well as to terrorize those who saw it, to deter them from the crime or rebellion. The Romans did not tie the convict to the cross. They used tapered square spikes about 5.5 inches long and drove them into the wrist and feet, causing excruciating and intolerable pain. Ultimately, one died of suffocation. To breathe, the convict was forced to push himself on his feet to allow for the lungs to expand. As the body weakened and the pain in the feet and legs became unbearable, he would eventually trade breathing for pain and exhaustion until the lungs collapsed and the heart finally failed. Why choose such a horrible death? Why would Jesus, God incarnate, God in flesh, God with us, choose to experience what is probably the most gruesome way to die in all of human history? Because of love. The sacrifice on the cross reveals how repulsive sin really is, but it also shows us the awesome magnitude of God's love. In God's incredible love, God refused to give us over to sin and death that we have chosen. Instead, He lowered Himself, became human, and took that sin and death upon Himself. The cross shows us the extremes to which God will go to save us, undeserving sinners that we are. Praise be to our God, who is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the whole earth was dark. About 3, Jesus cried with a loud shout, Ilahi, Ilahi, lima sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? After hearing him, some standing there said, He's calling Elijah. One of them ran over, took a sponge full of vinegar, and put it on a pole. He offered it to Jesus to drink. But the rest of them said, Let's see if Elijah will come and save him. Again, Jesus cried out with a loud shout. Then he died. Look, the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. Matthew 27, verses 45 through 51. We light a candle to remember and we extinguish it as a symbol of Jesus dying. As we remember Jesus' death, who else are you mourning? Consider the names of people who have gone before you, whom you are in mourning. Take a moment to lift them up in prayer. After this, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate if he could take the body of Jesus. Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one, because he feared the Jewish authorities. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and took the body away. Nicodemus, the one who at first had come to Jesus at night, was there too. He brought a mixture of myrrh and aloe, nearly 75 pounds in all. Following Jewish burial customs, they took Jesus' body and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths. There was a garden in the place where Jesus was crucified, and in the garden was a new tomb which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish preparation day and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus in it. John 19, verses 38 through 42. At death, a body was anointed with spices. Myrrh was a popular spice and one used to anoint Jesus' body. This reminds us of the gift that the Magi, or wise men, brought to Jesus at his birth: gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
As you go forth into the rest of your day, we hope that you will think on the events that we have shown you in this presentation. Take some time to reflect and pray as you prepare for Easter. We would encourage you to join us for our virtual worship on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock on Facebook Live, or shortly thereafter on our YouTube channel. We would also love for you to friend us on Facebook or leave us a message with your email address so that we can send you updates on Glendale Heights. We pray that we can get through this time of shelter in place and come back and worship in this beautiful sanctuary. Always remember, it's Friday, but Sunday is coming. Grace and peace to you and your families. Amen.